Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to be in Kerala. You know, I keep on saying that there is an eternal connection between Kerala and my home state, Manipur. If you're not aware, this sobriquet, the nickname of my state is called Little Paradise. So quite obviously, Little Paradise have to have some relationship with God's own country, I suppose. That's why we have commonality in football, in theater, in films. Both these states are pretty well known across the country. And I think this crisis has, I believe, brought us together more closer. This is, I think, my fourth visit to this state in my life. Recently, I was there in Kochi for an international film festival where, incidentally, one of my film was premiered. I also into filmmaking before I joined. I'm into too many things in my life, I suppose. And it so happened that after winning the Lok Sabha election, as per the new UGC rule, I'm still continue to be a teacher in JNU, and, which is in my bone marrow. It's my primary identity. What I shall do it briefly is just to lay out some issues for the rest of the country and for my audience to understand what is the issue that we face. I know it's a long history, and I'm aware that many of the people in this country is not aware of what happened in the Northeast. That's also primarily because of the exclusion that I mentioned in my first speech in Parliament, which has been part of my writing, academic writing or otherwise. Northeast is being included in India through a process of exclusion. And I have written this borrowing from an Italian thinker. It is inclusion by exclusion. That's the process through which Manipur or the Northeast become part of India. It is excluded from Indian history in just the way as the European would have excluded Africa and Asia and the rest of the world as, in Hegelian sense, people without history. And they were anthropological subjects. It was only after Battle of Plassey, for instance, that India finds its place in the history of the world within quote, dominated by the European lens as a part of history. In a very similar sense, you will see that I know as an academic for the last 31 years of my life, that you will find Northeast as a subject matter of anthropology, not as a part of history. So it is excluded from NCERT textbook and so on. That's peculiarly what the post-colonial scholar says. There is a continuity between the colonial and the post-colonial in South Asia. And a classic example is what the Northeast is to India. It is on the same principles that I asked a very prominent journalist as he was interviewing me, and I said, just answer me first. I said, had this crisis been in places like the so-called mainstream, UP, Bihar, or Bengal, or anywhere, do you think that it would have been allowed to go on like this? He shook his head, and I said, therein lies the answer. You must ask why it was allowed, or it has been allowed for so long in that part of the world. So in this sense, like many issues in this country, what happened in the Northeast and Manipur in particular in the present crisis is a legacy issue. It has a lot to do with the practices and ideas injected by the colonial forces. Just as we know how census was introduced in this part of the world and classifications of people and how identities get reified based on those colonial practices. We are all familiar with that. What happened in Manipur is, unfortunately, there was a forced topographical and categories were injected by the colonial British. We should know that right from Kashmir to Uttarakhand to Nepal and Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh to Nagaland to Manipur till Mizoram, and all the way to Arakan Ranges and even Andaman Nicobar Island, was created through a collision of the Indian plate and the Eurasia plate, sometimes like 50 million years ago. That's the elevation we call it Himalayan regions. So Manipur is part of the Himalayan ranges. What the Britishers did was that there is a large central valley in the middle of the state, which is roughly around 8% of the total area of the state. This is where the largest community to which I belong, the Meitei, reside majorly. And around 92% of the total area is an up highland, which is where various tribes are settled. And this dynamics had a particular way or form of life where they interacted, they relate with each other in many ways, like most South Asian communities. It was through a particular classificatory scheme. They were seen as if they are discrete, opaque boundary identities. That's how the colonial practices have done in South Asia. The same thing happened in Manipur. What they described was that those people in the Central Valley, they call it civilized and civilization, and those people in the surrounding hills are savages and naked tribes. They forget that in their forms of life, as well-known scholars like Sudipto Kaviraj and others will remind us, they have a relationship in this country. It's a fuzzy community. We all have relationship. They marry each other, they go to war sometime together, they will fight with each other at times. But it was created as if these are two different sets of people. One called civilized. It's a typical European way of looking at the Mediterranean region as a civilized people, and the Nordic people as the savages, barbarians, and so on. That kind of classification was injected by the Britishers, particularly around 19th century. And they further consolidate once they took over Manipur. In the 20th century, they introduced laws, and they started treating these two sets of people as two different sets of people through different legal regimes. So they have created two sets of subjects. And that particular identity was internalized. And on that basis, they began to look at each other in the similar fashions, that as if they are different, they are unrelated, as if they cannot have a common goal. That's a kind of a thing, if you take a little larger perspective, that's the same thing that many scholars will tell you about the Hindus and Muslims. Let's remember that communalism, as many scholars will remind you, was a product of the colonial practices and processes. In a very similar sense, what happened in Manipur is a legacy issue in the same sense. It is a kind of a schism which was manufactured by the British. They complemented this division of the population in terms of a topographical false mapping. You think about it, how many of you will think that Nainital and Dehradun are two different places? They are part of the Shivalik region of the Himalayan ranges. Dehradun is briefly around 640 meters above sea level, and Nainital is around 2,000. They are part of the Himalayan ranges. Mark my word again, 640 meters. Dehradun is a hill station. Nainital is a hill station with 2,000 meters. Imphal is 800 meters above sea level, higher than Dehradun, and it is treated as if it is like a plain. In Churachampur, the hub of the conflict, where this tribal group reside, is barely 900 meters, a difference of 100 meters. But in the topographical mapping, they think that it is the same relationship like Allahabad would have with Nainital, or Guwahati, which is 50 meters above sea level, with Kohima, the then Naga Hills, which is around 1,500 meters. They have falsely mapped out what is essentially a part of a mountainous region as a hill and the plain. So it complemented this one, and this trouble has continued. That's why they said hills should be separated, valleys should be separated, forgetting that this is topographically and ecologically a compact state, intimately tied geographical formation with interrelated communities. To think of it, what you called Kuki tribes, their language, according to linguistic classification, is part of the Kuki-Chin linguistic family, of which my language, Manipuri, the first Indo-Mongoloid language to be recognized in the 8th schedule of the Constitution, is also part of the Kuki-Chin groups. So it is a schism which was manufactured. So that is a kind of a colonial legacy. What happened is in the post-colonial period, what they have done is that Indian state, its practices, instead of reversing these colonial categories, reinforces the two sets of communities. One was classified as scheduled tribe and the other as non-scheduled tribes. That my community is a non-scheduled tribe, general category. The other is a tribe. Then Christianity is spread among these ST groups, majorly in the mid-20th century. And traditionally, those people in the Central Valley, there are a lot of valleys in Manipur, don't get confused, but I'm talking about the Central Valley in the middle. They are part of what we call it Manipuri Vaishnavite. We are quite like the Japanese in some sense, because you follow your actual ritual and thought processes. Your institutions are a mixture of, just like the Japanese, between the traditional Shinto religion and Buddhism. Meitei's religious practices are majorly part of the larger, what you can call it, Vaishnavite tradition and the pre-Vaishnavite religious belief. We practice both of them. I'm wearing one of them. This is our demi-king god, which is the protector of the polis, the state. So what I'm saying is that not only that, colonial practice continued in the post-colonial period, classifying one as ST, another as non-ST. And then again, they introduced laws in 1960s, and they classified the upland as hills and the Central Valley as plain. Interestingly, in Nagaland, which is also part of the mountainous range, there is a place called Dimapur, which is their commercial hub, which is part of the extension of the Indo-Gangetic plain called Brahmaputra Valley, which is considered to be part of a hill state. And Imphal, the capital city, is supposed to be a plain, as if it is like Lucknow, Allahabad, and Guwahati. Interestingly, in 1965, in National Development Councils, there was a move, the decision was taken in 1964, to take care of the hill regions development in National Development Council in 1964. Decision was taken. A report was submitted in 1965. And there they have this, all India, they classify, two groups of states with hill areas. One, they call it hill state. Another, they call it state with hill areas. Kerala is considered to be a state with hill areas. So does Assam, Madhya Pradesh, and so on. UP, before Uttarakhand was separated. Manipur was classified, along with Nagaland and in Kashmir and all of them, as part of the hill state. But within it, both legally and institutionally and conceptually, you think that there is a plain and there is a hill and two different kinds of people. It is this worldview and practices in institutions that is implicated in the present crisis. It was aggravated by what can be called practices of the post-colonial Indian state practices, which primarily I'll mention only one because I don't have time, counterinsurgency. Manipur was a kingdom. We know that Indian history, following the negotiation in the London on Round Table, and the Simon Commission report, an administrative reform was carried out and the Government of India 1935 was passed. We assume it to be a federal state, combining what used to be called Indian state or princely state on the one side, and the British India, which is directly ruled by the British. They came together, but it did not work out. 1937 election was held by excluding this princely state. But Sardar Patel and V.P. Menon tried to integrate these princely states under the same Act, 1935. An instrument of annexation was carried out. Manipur was one of those states. Out of the 600 states, they have listed less than 100 states as a gun salute state. Manipur was a 11 gun salute state. Kashmir and Hyderabad were 21 gun salute state. Cochin and Travancore was also one of those gun salute states. So Manipur came, but unlike other princely states, Manipur had a constitution of its own. The king was reduced to a constitutional monarch. But the government of India bulldozed those constitutions and the assemblies. That's the dissatisfaction led to the armed movement in Manipur. As a part of countering that, Indian state did was to prop up these small tribal armed groups to fight against these armed groups. So it is a part of that violence that continue, and the present crisis is part of the same problem. Many of the so-called Sioux groups of these Kukis have never fought with the Indian state. They have never fired a single bullet, so to speak, against Indian armed forces. Yet these are armed groups. The government of India maintain a relationship and suspension operations. You must understand why some people demand the scrapping of these Sioux. It is these practices that they was burst into flame for two reasons. I think I'll just cut short with this. Because of these tradition of separate and practices various kinds of ideas, there is a movement for Zalingam, which is supposed to be an independent country comprising of what they call it Kuki-Chin groups in Bangladesh and Myanmar, which is a Chin state, neighboring Mizoram. So it encompasses a large group of these areas, and there is an ethno-nationalist mobilization. And part of the population in Manipur southern part is implicated in that movement. So many of them imagine Kuki state within India as some sort of a halfway home to maintain their own autonomy within their structures. So they will side with this side, Indian state one time, another side, this side. So that gets complicated. And the Indian state continued this move. Many observers believe this crisis is also related to controlling and neutralizing political armed groups who have been fighting against the Indian state. This particular crisis, they said, is part of that, to mobilize forces, to create alternative civil society forces. In fact, it has been done now. You have armed groups who have never heard of before. There are groups which are much more active today, and that neutralizes and balances some of the traditional forces. So this is part of the crisis that we have. Two more issues. The Golden Triangle, notorious for its drug and poppy, has UN reports suggested that it has shifted its gear towards the eastern side, out of Laos, Thailand, and Myanmar. Myanmar became the hub of that one. It has spillover in Manipur. That is why bordering Myanmar, you have massive forests and hill areas, you have poppy cultivations. So there are an international drug dimensions to the crisis, and we are pretty sure that local people are also involved, but I suspect that those people will be minor player of this game. But when I say minor, remember that when you're dealing with opiums like this, even a minor would mean thousands of crores of rupees. And according to some observers, when I had a conversation with them, the economy of drug in Manipur runs in 60,000 crores, much bigger than that of the state's own budget. Lastly, but not the least, there is also competitive democratic politics. You try to prop up yourself as leader of the Meitei community, one as leader of the Kuki community, and BJP played game. What they did was that they asked these Sioux groups in 2017, 2022, it's all in public domain, you Google it and you'll see. These Sioux groups, these armed Kuki groups, supported them in elections. In promise, they were supposedly said that they will fulfill their political demand of a separate administration or something of that kind, which is openly came out because one of these groups, in an affidavit submitted to the court, written very clearly that I met so-and-so of the BJP and they promised us all of these things. On the other hand, they prop up some people from my community as a defender and the savior of the Meiteis. And it is this polarizations played by BJP government has aggravated the situation. And I suspect that the government of India's silence, which I call it its complicity in the whole crisis, please remember, in post-colonial Indian history, you have never heard of 60,000 people languishing in wretched condition in camps. I have seen them. It's horrifying. I happen to have some experience of doing partition studies of the 1947, particularly while I was working in a research institute called CSTS under the principal investigator was Professor Ashish Nandi. The case studies that I have read and I have seen, interviews that we have conducted, in live forms today I see in my own home state. Those pain and anger is what you have seen me in Parliament, and that had forced me to join what you call it a dirty domain called politics. I came in and people have spoken out. I won without the traditional style of elections where investing money. And Manipur elections, normally the margin is always around 20 to 30,000 maximum. I won the elections by 1 lakh, almost 10,000. And that is people speaking out for nobody like me from a university who comes there. And I think that is the issues. The road ahead is that I would suggest two things. Indian government and all of us must take a firm stand against any demand of a political structure based on communal, exclusivist, sectarian ideologies. That's the fundamental. You can have demand for administrative reforms or structures based on what the State Reorganization Commission had said to empower the people for participation in the governing on their life, and also for the effective and efficient delivery of goods and services. There must be an administrative rationale rather than an exclusive communal identity project. Indian government, whichever party holds it, and for the rest of us, if you don't do that, this country will not survive. It will open a Pandora's box. That's why State Reorganization Commission way back in 1956 have said it very clearly. It cannot be done on these communal identities, but it should be founded on administrative rationale for effective and efficient delivery of goods and services. And what should I say, still, I expect the government of India to assert its own authority, its read, as Weber would suggest, that you must claim the monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force. And that's what state is all about. When the state surrenders, you have warlords roaming around with guns. Afghanistan is a clear picture of that. We know what is the idea of a failed state when the state does not assert its authority. But I have told you, this government is complicit in its silence, allowing this violence to go on for so long clearly tells you that something is there in the mind of this government, and we must be careful about and alert to this move of the government. But still, I will ask the Prime Minister, as my leader Rahulji says, please visit. Call all your MA. Remember that all the leaders of this community's leader and that community leaders popping up as the savior of respective communities are all from BJPs. The one who is asking for defending Manipur is also in the cabinet. The one who is demanding for separation also in their cabinet. And the game plan, 200 plus people have lost life. Lawlessness, economy is destroyed, investment has flown away from the state, shops are being closed down, petrol pumps have been closed down, and 60,000 people are still suffering in wretched condition. We all need voice from your end as well to pressure the government of India to behave. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Professor. It's very easy to call you Professor and get away with it, but I would like to know from you, how do you want to be addressed? By your first name, which is Bimol, or your surname, which is Akoijam? And why do you have your surname second? Usually I thought in the Northeast people have the surname first and the given name second. So
yeah, that's true. In my part of the world, we write our surname before. You know, I joined what can be called a revivalist movement when I was in school. So I had a surname called Singh, which is a typical caste name. So I removed it, and I put my clan name in the front. And because the surname is important, so when I study outside, people tend to shorten my name, and my surname disappeared. That's why I put the surname behind mine. My first name is Bimol, which is primarily in the eastern part of India. It's a Sanskrit word for Vimal.
Vimal.
So it's become in Bengal Bimol with that rounded sound. So we have all the way to Manipur. You can call me Bimol.
Bimol. Thank you, Bimol. So that also, I mean, gives a hint of the ethnic composition of that area, which you explained in your ethnogeographic talk that you had given. But how deep is the communal divide now? It has become, instead of an ethnic conflict, it has become a communal divide now. So could you please explain?
Yeah, first of all, I think, you know, Prasanna, there's something that I have been reminding. Sorry, I tend to sound more still. I said, in my bone marrow, I am still a professor. So I tend to talk like this. So there is an issue, and the term like race has become problematic in the post-colonial period, or post-war period, as they call in Europe. So I suspected everything that we used to talk about race has now been discussed under a more acceptable terminology like ethnic. So in US, they will say which ethnicity. That would mean that you are in Eastern immigrant or Western Europe immigrant, so like that. So in other sense, in this sense, ethnic has that racial sense of the term. And I found out very interestingly that in India, rest of the conflict, group conflict, we call it communal conflict. I'm glad that you use this word, but in the Northeast, because of this racial profiling, all the conflict in the Northeast is often referred to as ethnic conflict, which I tend to avoid. So it is a communal conflict, which I have explained. It is a legacy issues and how contemporary politics aggravates the same thing. And this violence, unfortunately, has brought the conflict to the societal and personal spaces. So the conflict has become very, very deep now. But by saying this, I don't want to support those people who says you can't live together and stuff like that. It's unacceptable to me. But it's, as a country, we cannot accept that kind of a reasoning. This deepened divide must be overcome. We must be doing things to reverse this, to do all kinds of healing processes that is required. So, yes, it is very, very deep now, particularly between these two communities, following this violence, and especially after you have allowed it to happen for so long.
You talked about your election from Inner Manipur and the large majority or the huge majority that you won by. So what is the significance of that? Yes, it's not just the numbers as you rightly said.
I think so. I think that, you know, this country, our country has a huge percentage of 60% or around that is young people. Manipur is no exception to this. So I can see, you know, young people campaigning for me, you know, people who do not even have the voting right, school kids, you know, 15 years old, because they have mobile phone. I've heard a lot of stories about when I go for campaigning, I say, they call me affectionately Oza. Oza in Manipur means master or teacher. So he said, Oza, don't campaign. My daughter had called up from London, or my daughter has called up from people. The clear message to anybody that don't take the people of Manipur for granted. I think that's the meaning of the victory that we have.
Did this victory, I mean, did it have anything to do with the visit of your party leader, Mr. Rahul Gandhi, to Manipur? Because he started his second Bharat Jodo Yatra from Manipur. Yeah. So did your victory have anything to or
I think so. Because, you know, when the Prime Minister says that you don't matter, your tragedy don't matter, you know, train accident in, you know, Orissa matters, some bridge collapse in Gujarat matters, Ukraine matters to me, but give a damn to Manipur kind of an attitude. But at national leader coming in saying that we care for you, I think it sends out to communications and people do feel about it.
So when you look forward, I mean, though assembly elections are quite far away, but what would this, I mean, your seat as well as the other Manipur seat, both were won by the Congress. So what does it signify for the assembly elections that are forthcoming?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that, I mean, this is not only a dream and we should not allow that. I know there is a wave and BJP will learn, if they haven't learned still, that despite, in my constituency, there are 32 assembly segments and only 3 belongs to the Congress MLAs. Despite that, 22 constituencies, we tells you there's something.
Manipur seat, both were won by the Congress. So what does it signify for the assembly elections that are forthcoming?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that, I mean, this is not only a dream and we should not allow that. I know there is a wave and BJP will learn, if they haven't learned still, that despite, in my constituency, there are 32 assembly segments and only 3 belongs to the Congress MLAs. Despite that 22 constituencies, we were ahead of them. So that's a clear message. They will be routed out in 27, and we will be working towards that. That's one of the recovery and self-respect for the people of the state.
So how's, no, I mean, is the situation right now, is it something we can call normal or near normal or a matter of concern?
You know, Northeast has suffered from what we often call it normalizations of the disorder. This is a disorder order. You know, that's a system. You have military paradigms working simultaneously with civilian ethos and so on. There are a lot of abnormalities. So the present crisis, that abnormal aspect has been sought to be normalized by the Prime Minister. For instance, he said schools are opening and this are opening. He doesn't mention that my people will not go to colleges in Churachampur, or Churachampur students don't attend colleges in Imphal and so on. You know, so there's a division. Bureaucracy is divided. You don't get posted in another area if you belong to another, which is unheard of in this country. So, you know, so I would say there's an attempt to normalize this disorder. But to my mind, the situation is more or less the same.
So what steps do you would recommend need to be taken by the central government as well as the state government to bring it back to at least near normalcy?
I think, as I've suggested, first thing that the government of India must take a very firm stand on the fact that there is no demand will be given based on communal, sectarian, exclusivist identity politics. But that should be a very firm communication that many of these communal cacophony will disappear. 2, the prime ministers must visit the place, as G.K. Pillai once said, our Home Secretary said, you know, Manipur has been, a lot of injustice have been done to Manipur, so Prime Minister should go and apologize. He said long time back. I think if I've said this in one of the interviews, if Modi ji has the Raj Dharma in his mind, he should go and apologize for what has happened and try to say that now I will work, pass is pass, and no fight, my citizen will not be used as a guinea pig in this kind of a violence. So he should do that, and then he should call all his MLAs and thrash it out among themselves first. Otherwise, do the necessary thing to, you know, they are propping up a satrap in Manipur. You know, it's like a rubber stamp. Everything is dictated by Delhi, and only for the name you have a government being propped there. In fact, a long time back in Karan Thapa's interview, I warned, today it may be Manipur. This erosion of federal structures can happen anywhere with this one nation, one language, one religion kind of thing. Manipur is experiencing that. The CM has admitted that his power has been removed, and funnily, he is a willing partner to this whole game.
I think we are running out of time, but before that, tell us about your family. You have a school-going daughter, and your wife is a school teacher. Your father was a professor, and he joined Congress in 1980.
Many people said, my father was also a history professor, and he also joined Congress in 4th election way back in 1980. Though I'm not in Congress because of my father, please. I have nothing to do with that. I have my wife and my children are here. Yeah, there are 2 daughters, and these are my nephew, and I have this. I have my elder brother. We have come from professional family. So my brother is, my elder brother was a police officer who expired. One is a doctor, he's a professor and dean of the biggest medical college in Imphal. My sister-in-law is also a doctor. She also teaches in the college. My younger brother does business, so I come from that academic, professional background. My uncle were in the Air Force and stuff like that. So we come from that kind of a family.
But you are also a creative side. You are a filmmaker.
Yeah.
And I heard you are also a singer.
My mother used to say I'm in the wrong profession. I should have been a singer. So I still get a chance in my film, then I will always sing one song for myself. And I'm into films. I'm in love with cinema since the 80s when I was a student.
Okay.
So I make movies, and in fact in JNU also I teach a paper on cinema and culture in India. So cinema is, God willing, I'm already working on my next feature film, so let me see, because of this crisis I couldn't concentrate. I'd love to do that one.
Thank you, but if you had little more time, I would have requested you to sing here. But
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we missed that.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this. And thank you for Manoroma for inviting me here and allowing to share my concern. I think, please pray for my home state. The suffering of the people of my home state should be considered as suffering of humanity and this country. All of us are part of that pain. Some governments, some people think that it don't matter to them. But I think Kerala is one state I could feel that has stood up for Manipur. And thank you so much for your solidarity.
Thank you, Professor Akoijam. And our thoughts are there always with Manipur, and you're not alone, sir.